Rolling?
We're rolling.
Okay. All right. Well, when I picked February, I thought, ooh, that's going to be so cool because it's like Abraham Lincoln's birthday, George Washington's birthday, Valentine's Day, Chinese New Year. I can just pull all kinds of things. Well, that's just the problem. You pull all kinds of things, and we'll be here the rest of the day. So this is kind of a Cliff Notes version of a February program. Okay, now I already had a little article on George Washington about his love of flowering trees, and so I just kind of went a little farther with that and discovered that his favorite tree is the eastern redbud, and it's because he liked color. You know, he liked the flowering trees, he liked color. He liked to walk out at Mount Vernon and see color. It's all seasons. Well, the redbud blooms the earliest of trees in Virginia. So the camellia and all these things probably had not been brought over from China by then. Maybe not, I don't know. But the redbud was the first to bloom. So in this stark, horrible winter, scene, boom, here would be these beautiful pink flowers. So he was known to like go through, when he would be traveling from place to place, if he saw one out in the woods, he'd have someone in his group go dig it up and bring it back to Mount Vernon and plant it. So it was really his favorite. And I've got a picture, hopefully this doesn't flip over, but this is the redbud, and this is a picture of, this is a painting that was done of Mount Vernon. That's probably not George there, but they make it out to be George Washington in his blue coat, and here are his flowering trees around his plantation. Okay. The other tree that I want to tell you about George, y'all, is this tulip poplar. Now, during the Revolutionary War, the French came over to help. The most famous one was Lafayette, the Marquis de Lafayette, and he and George Washington became great friends, like a father-son kind of relationship. So anyway, so they were like super friends for 7 years. Lafayette gets ready to go back to France, and he gifts George Washington 2 tulip poplar trees. He said the tulip poplar, this is what they look like in the fall, this beautiful gold like treasure or golden picture. He said, these trees represent prosperity, and I'm giving you 2, one for your own prosperity and one for your new nation's prosperity. And so George was so moved by that he immediately planted them at Mount Vernon. And they have a tulip-like flower on them. They are gigantic. This is just one of the docets at the Mount Vernon pictured in front of it. They are so tall that for the last 20 or so years, bees that live at Mount Vernon cannot even fly high enough to pollinate the top blooms. So the arborist there brings in bucket trucks from all over, and he and his friends load up in the bucket trucks, soar 250 feet in the air, and hand pollinate those 2 popular trees because they're the only things left at Mount Vernon that was there when George Washington was there. Now, Martha Washington, little cutie pie right here, was kind of known for her entertainment skills, and people liked going to events at Mount Vernon. And even before she married George, the Custis family was well known. Well, her granddaughters asked her to write down her recipes, and she did, and she was quite clever. One is called Big Cake, and it's the one that starts with 40 eggs. And the one I baked today is called Washington Cake. Now, she was quite clever, wasn't she? And anyway, all these recipes are for gigantic cakes. Well, like what would 40 eggs, how big would that cake be? Well, the Martha Stewart took her recipes and kind of shrunk them down to make them kind of a normal cake size cake for people to taste what Martha Washington would have served. Okay, so this is Washington cake. I invested 6 eggs in this sucker, so it's an expensive cake. And Mike took a bite of it and said, well, I tell you, I've been on a diet and I haven't had anything sweet since Christmas, and I still haven't. I mean, honestly, her cake is like bread, and it's kind of a heavy bread, and you will not hurt my feelings if you don't take but one bite. But here, let me send it down, start with BB. But I'm telling you, ugh. Mm-mm. Pam?
That's good, Sheriff.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I've had cinnamon toast or raisin bran bread.
Now,
Let's have your plate. Here you go. I gave everybody a tiny piece, and like I said, if you don't want more than one bite, it won't hurt my feelings because it is yucky.
so how many eggs?
6, and that's the dumb downsize. It started with 40.
40.
I would have had to have gone to the bank for a loan for a cake that had 40 eggs.
How many people would her cake
No
serve?
telling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If it had that many.
100 maybe. I don't know.
Now, see, did they drink tea in
Yeah,
the yard when they served this? Like,
probably.
they didn't
Mm-hmm.
do
Yep.
sweet
Well,
food.
I talked to a friend in Nack, and I was telling her about how unsweet it was, and she said, well, they didn't use sugar. Sugar was very valuable. They didn't use sugar for these things unless it was Christmas or a celebration. So they took that sugar and turned it into beer because drinking beer was safer than drinking the water.
Oh, God.
And I said, well, makes sense. So anyway, that's George. George
Okay, so
did
What
I'm
are
sorry.
these?
raisins.
Raisins, okay.
The
Yeah,
icing is good, too.
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's what probably saved the day was frosting. If you can get just enough frosting and a raisin, it's edible. And there is plenty more if y'all. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. I have to choke that down. Yeah. I said it's not going to hurt my feelings because that was yuck. I was so heartbroken after I had invested my 6 eggs. I mean, it was $9.99 for 18. And I sent a third of my eggs into that yucky cake.
We're going to have to get some chicken.
Yeah. Well, anyway, after George, John Adams was the next president, of course, and he actually got to move into the White House, but only for like 4 months. And then Thomas Jefferson was elected. And Thomas Jefferson was probably the best one that they could have gotten at that time to landscape this brand new White House because, it was a construction scene. So anyway, since he had traveled all over Europe and had visited state houses everywhere, he kind of knew what the White House lawn, what it should look like. And so he and one of his landscape architects was named Bullfinch. I've seen that name many times around Washington. Anyway, they got together and made a plan, and it's kind of sort of the plan that's still there. They wanted groups of trees that kind of frame the building and kind of leads your eye to the front door. It's just a very basic, traditional state house look of Europe, and that's what the White House is now. And anyway, so Jefferson gets it all fixed up, and then there's like, 3 more presidents after. So like the first 6 presidents are all that of the same founding father group of men. They had money, they had an education, and they were kind of a little clique. They felt that they were sort of gentlemen, and everybody else was kind of the common man, kind of, imbalance of society. Well, anyway, it just so happened that the economy was not doing all that well during John Quincy Adams's presidency, and he raised tariffs, which hacked everybody off. And one of the opposing political parties nominated Andrew Jackson to be president. Well, these people in Washington, D.C. pretty much lost their silk shirts and lace and everything over having this, what did they call him? Not a frontiersman, but a ruffian. They couldn't have a ruffian be elected president. Well, Andrew Jackson was a very popular person with these common people. He wore buckskin. He didn't wear the silk and the lace and all that stuff. He was not very highly educated like the others had been, but he was a war hero. The common people loved him as much as everybody had loved George Washington the generation before, because he had defeated the British and he had run off all the Indians. So he was their man, and they couldn't criticize him. So when he was running for election against John Quincy Adams, they dug up dirt on his wife. And they found out that she had been married before she married Jackson, and they couldn't find any record of her divorce. So every newspaper in the country called her an adulterer and a bigamist. And it got so bad that a man called her a harlot on the Congress Avenue in Washington, D.C., and Andrew Jackson took him out, challenged him to a duel, and shot and killed him. So he probably was a ruffian. But anyway, poor old Rachel, she was pretty, not when she died, but she was pretty here. She was in her 60s. She had been born with a heart defect. She smoked cigars. Her little Indian that she had adopted as a baby had grown up and caught measles and died that summer while they were all campaigning. And all this added to her, this public humiliation of her being accused of not divorcing her first husband, just kind of piled on. And about 2 weeks after Jackson was elected, she was complaining of her arm hurting, and she went to sleep, went to bed, and died, from a heart attack. So she never got to be the first lady of the country. She was first lady of Tennessee for a number of years, but Andrew Jackson didn't take this cruelty to his wife easily. He dug up 2 of her southern magnolias from their house. He took them with him to Washington, D.C., and he planted them on the front lawn of the White House. And those are the 2 southern magnolia trees you see on the back of the $20 bill. They're right here, and I blew up the picture here. It doesn't have a piece of tape on it anymore. But here you can see them. That's a little better picture, a real $20 bill. You can look at it and see them here. And so every time anyone had business with the president, they had to walk past Rachel's trees to get to see him. So he reminded them every time that he had business with them that they had killed his wife. He didn't get over it. I mean, he never married. He never remarried. He always carried a little locket with her picture, and that's this picture. It's just a little painting. That early there was no photography. So anyway, so that's the southern magnolia, those two. That in the one on the left, I believe, is the one that's not doing well. It has been dying for the last, and it's almost 240 years old, 230. So anyway, it's been dying, and every pruning season, they keep lopping it off. So it's getting shorter and shorter as they're trying to save it. So, but it's there, right?
I'm wondering,
One of these.
you know, if they have taken any of the seed and tried to plant them. Surely they have.
Surely.
Surely they have. And they do work. 'Cause remember,
Yeah.
I had one that grew from seed.
So, yeah, well, anyway, that's the southern magnolia that's connected to Andrew Jackson. And then for the rest of the 19th century, trees just really wasn't a thing with presidents, not until like 1893. And that planting is actually connected to Abraham Lincoln, and that's why he's here. Abraham Lincoln, we know he was born in that log cabin in Kentucky. But before we get to that one, let me show you this. This. I think this is probably the. Okay. It's a terrible picture. It was hard to blow it up. But this is one of those old-timey, the very, very infancy of photography picture. This is Abraham Lincoln here. That's his bare head. He had taken his hat off while he's delivering the Gettysburg Address. And this stick you see in the background is that honey locust tree. This is what the honey locust tree looks like today. And they call it the witness tree because it was there watching or listening or seeing Abraham Lincoln deliver his famous Gettysburg Address. And it grows at the entrance of the cemetery that he was there to dedicate that day. Well, anyway, there's this organization called American Forests. It's AmericanForests.org now. At that time, it would have been American Forest something else. But they had the good sense to gather the seeds from this honey locust tree, from the white oak tree that grows at Abraham Lincoln's birthplace, and other historical trees around the world, around the United States. They gather them and they grow them for so people will have them. They started out, the idea was that any time a soldier from the Civil War who had been awarded the Medal of Honor, if they were to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, this organization would give one of these honey locust trees to be planted in Arlington National Cemetery as kind of an extra honor, because of their because of what they had done. Now you can pretty much buy them. They're like $25 because, that tree's been growing 200 years. It drops 100 seeds a year or something, so there's plenty. It's not a scarce thing anymore. But anyway, now the other thing about the white oak, after the Civil War, everybody who hated Lincoln still hated him. Everybody who loved him still loved him. We were still a very, divided country. Well, historian, when something is happening, when an event is happening at that time, you can't really wrap your head around what's happening. But years later, historians started looking at what had happened and thought, Lincoln was really a remarkable human being. We have had some alcoholics in the White House. We've had crooks in the White House. We've had yucks in the White House. But Abraham Lincoln was kind of a step above all of them. He held our country together, and we should respect that. We should honor him. And that kind of got the things, kind of rolling around, the United States, saying, yeah, you're right, we should honor him. He was a good person. He was a a very, very good leader, probably the best leader we could have had. And one of the first things that was done to honor him was Grover Cleveland planted one of these white oak trees that was grown from the birthplace in Kentucky. He planted it at the White House, and that was just one of the first things that happened. They put his face on a penny. Just things started, and we started celebrating his birthday. So, but none of this happened, right when the Civil War was over. We were still very divided. But anyway, that's only all these people from the South, whether it was Rachel at Tennessee or Mary Todd Lincoln, would have included pecans in their desserts because that's just what Southern people do. Anyway, so for your delight, and these are good, I'd give you a pecan tassie. Mm.
I have to write something down.
Oh, okay. Well, did I give you two, BB? Okay. Okay. This is Carol.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I will. There's plenty, and those are good, like I said. So that kind of ends our 19th century. So we're moving into the 20th century now, and with the 20th century came automobiles. Let's see, let me leave that. And enter William Howard Taft. The Tafts were real hotshot people. They were, they saw that the automobile was the future. And so they wanted to learn how to drive. Well, the only reason Taft had been elected probably was because he was Theodore Roosevelt's vice president. And Theodore Roosevelt had only been president because his president, McKinley, had been assassinated. So the Secret Service was not going to let the Tafts hop in convertibles and chug around all over town in their cars for fear of assassination. The Secret Service couldn't protect them. So he said, well, I will just make me a private street, which he did. There was, I don't know if I've got a picture. This is, I almost knocked it off again. This is a terrible picture. But the Washington Monument is here, the Capitol is here, the White House is back up here. And this tidal basin is a man-made body of water that keeps the Potomac River from being too high or too low along this area where all those monuments and things are built. Okay, well, it was just a dirt path, a walking path through a forest when Taft came along. Well, he had a street paved that started up at the White House, went over to the Washington Monument, and came down and ran along the tidal basin. Okay, well, he thought it was a great idea. People were not that thrilled with having this big concrete thing there for him and his wife to practice driving on. Well, she had him build a bandstand at the end of it so the Marine Band could play for the public, on Wednesdays and Fridays. I think they still do. But anyway, they tried to make it as palatable as they could. But it got named, Taft Speedway. Well, enter Eliza Skidmore, a lady you've never heard of. She had grown up in Japan, and she was like a reporter, a world traveler, and she thought the festivals that they had in Japan and China and other Asian nations, it was just a beautiful thing, with the beautiful, beautiful cherry trees and things in the spring. And she wanted to bring that look to Washington, D.C. And she had tried to sell her idea for through asking, presenting it several times. It was always ignored. And then the Tafts came along, and Helen Taft, well, let me back up. The Tafts he had been the Governor General of the Philippines before he was tapped to become Roosevelt's vice president. So anyway, they had lived in the Philippines, so they had traveled to China and Japan and around, and they were familiar with how these festivals work and how neat it is. So they were the perfect couple for Eliza to make her proposal to again. And it also helped that there was a man whose name I shall not mention, was growing some out in the countryside, and he was kind of flirting with the idea of doing it too. So since there was a man involved, who could vote, along with poor little Eliza, they decided, you know what, since everybody dislikes our speedway, let's put those cherry trees along that speedway. And they did. And what you see now is that is the picture you want. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., you want your picture made with the Washington Monument in the background and the cherry trees in the front. Okay? I mean, that's the iconic view. And it's all because of Eliza, who got no respect. So anyway, most of the cherry trees are the Yoshino. They sent over, the very first time they tried to do it, they sent about 3,500 trees from Japan. Okay, they loaded them in a ship. The ship came across the Pacific, went to Seattle, got on a train, came to Washington, and they were all so eat up with insects that the USDA made them burn them, and they had to start over. So the next year they got 5,000 trees. This time it came in a cargo ship that was refrigerated, put on a refrigerated rail car in Seattle. This time they arrived and they were planted, and they like this. The Yoshino is the one that has the white, more of the white than the pink, and there's more of them than others, but they kind of crossbreed, and they get light pink, dark pink, white. They're kind of all going together. And kind of an ironic thing about this was from 1912, is that the cherry trees were pretty much destroyed in Japan during World War II. So we actually gave them some of ours from 1912 so they would have some to start over with, like in the 1950s. Okay, that was the Tafts. And the Tafts, believe it or not, they were, like I said, they were very, they had traveled quite a bit, but when they got ready to entertain, they always wanted to entertain with American food. And so for our American food, we're going to have apple pie. Okay. Okay.
Such a sweet program.
I know, it is. All right, now that's kind of the end of my of the presidents and their birthdays and all that. So we're going to talk about Valentine's Day. Aren't they the cutest little couple you've ever seen? I know everybody, Jimmy Carter, but y'all, they are just adorable. And they were married 77 years. So that has got to be the Valentine's Day award to presidents. And of course, his domestic policies, not too popular, but he did broker a peace deal between Egypt and Israel that is still in effect. They have never violated any part of the peace treaty that he brokered, called the Camp David Accord. And for here he is planting a tree, and it's a cedar of Lebanon tree, which is apparently a tree that grows in the Middle East that kind of represents their peace in the Middle East. Okay, and all right, and oh, it fell. Anyway, Rosalind was known for her down-hominess, and she made this little treat, and she called them humdingers, and the staff at the White House just ate them up. Now, you got to have more than one humdinger. Okay. Love them, and they are pretty good. They're made with dates, so if anybody has a date, D-A-T-E, date. Let me give you two at least. Now there's plenty, but they're so good. Now they're sweet, unlike Martha. Rosalind knew how to use sugar. So anyway, those are called humdingers. And lastly, being a school teacher, we have to do Black History Month in February. And it's the Obamas, of course, which when you're doing Black History Month for presidents, it doesn't take long. So anyway, there we go, the Obamas. Oh, and remember the Rachel's tree? Here's kind of a picture, if you can see how ratty looking it is. Well, it just so happens that the Bidens planted a tree 4 years ago that it is not it's not a direct descendant of the Rachel Jackson tree. It's actually a descendant of one of the John F. Kennedy trees that was planted in Jackie's Rose Garden. But anyway, it's growing right here, and as this one keeps getting lopped off to be shorter, this one is growing on up. So eventually, they will be able to remove the dead or the dying, diseased Rachel tree, and that Kennedy one will take its place. Okay. And I think that's everything you ever wanted to know about things in February.